I never imagined that a stolen notebook would transform our entire classroom, least of all the heart of young Thomas Blackwell, our school's most notorious troublemaker. The new girl arrived on a particularly dreary Tuesday in September, when the raindrops seemed determined to wash away any remnant of summer's cheer. Most of us hardly noticed her at first, another face in the crowd of St. Catherine's Secondary School. She was small for her age, perhaps 12 or 13, with rich brown skin and dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform was impeccable, not in the way of children whose parents spend fortunes on prestige, but in the manner of someone who treats possessions with genuine care. The pleats of her skirt fell in perfect lines. Her white blouse remained mysteriously unstained despite the morning downpour, and her navy blazer looked as though it had been pressed that very morning. But what caught everyone's attention was not her appearance, but the book she clutched to her chest, as though it contained the secrets of the universe. It wasn't the standard-issue notebook that the rest of us carried, dog-eared and graffitied within an inch of its life. This was a leather-bound journal, the cover worn smooth in places with gold-edged pages that caught the fluorescent lighting of our classroom. When she set it on her desk, I glimpsed the words "Faith Journal" embossed in simple gold lettering on the spine, and beneath it the name Sophia Martinez. The combination of its obvious value and its religious nature made it an immediate target in our secular institution. Mrs. Bennett, our form teacher, introduced her with characteristic efficiency. "Class, this is Sophia Martinez. She's joining us from St. Mary's Academy in Leeds. I expect you all to make her feel welcome." The perfunctory introduction complete, Mrs. Bennett returned to her desk, leaving Sophia to find her seat, the only empty one in the room, directly in front of Thomas Blackwell. Thomas was 15, a full head taller than most boys his age, with a perpetual scowl that seemed carved into his otherwise handsome features. His uniform always looked as though it had been slept in. Tie askew, shirt untucked, blazer missing entirely more often than not. His father was some important banker who donated generously to the school, which explained why Thomas remained enrolled despite his abysmal academic record and worse behavior. "What's that, then?" Thomas's voice carried across the classroom as Mrs. Bennett turned to write on the whiteboard. He was pointing at Sophia's journal. "Bible study? Are you some kind of Jesus freak?" The classroom fell silent, 30 pairs of eyes swiveling to watch the exchange. Sophia turned slightly in her seat, regarding Thomas with a composure unusual for someone her age. "It's my faith journal," she said simply, her voice soft but steady. "I write about what I learn from the Bible and what I pray about." A ripple of snickers passed through the classroom. Thomas's face split into a mocking grin. "Praying, are you? What for? Good marks? A pony? World peace?" Each suggestion drew more laughter from his audience, emboldening him further. Mrs. Bennett turned sharply. "That's enough, Thomas. Open your textbook to page 74. The interruption should have ended the matter, but the damage was done. The journal had been noticed, and in the ecosystem of our school, anything different was fair game. I watched throughout the morning as Sophia quietly took notes, seemingly oblivious to the whispers and glances directed her way. The journal remained on her desk, occasionally opened as she jotted something down, a verse perhaps or a thought. I caught glimpses of neat handwriting, carefully drawn margins, and what looked like colorful tabs marking different sections. During lunch, Sophia sat alone, the journal open beside her tray as she ate. She read from it between bites, occasionally making notes in the margins. I sat with my usual friends several tables away, but found my attention drawn to her repeatedly. There was something fascinating about her serenity, the way she seemed perfectly content in her solitude while surrounded by the chaotic energy of 300 adolescents. Thomas and his friends occupied their usual table in the corner, heads bent together in conspiratorial whispers, eyes darting occasionally towards Sophia. I recognized the look. They were planning something, and the new girl's precious journal would likely be at the center of it. The opportunity came during physical education, As we changed for netball in the girls' locker room, Sophia carefully placed her journal in her locker. I noticed she hesitated before closing the door, her fingers lingering on the cover as though reluctant to part with it even briefly. But school rules forbade bringing personal items to PE, so she finally shut the locker door with a soft click and joined the rest of us on the court. What happened next was predictable to anyone familiar with the workings of our school. The boys' PE class ended 15 minutes before ours. Thomas and two of his friends slipped into the unlocked girls' locker room, a common prank despite repeated disciplinary actions, and emerged minutes later, Thomas clutching a leather-bound book to his chest in a cruel imitation of Sophia's earlier posture. By the time we returned to the locker room, the theft had been accomplished, and Sophia's distress was immediate and heartbreaking. She stood before her open locker, hands trembling slightly as she moved her few possessions aside, searching for what was no longer there. Her composure finally broke, tears welling in her dark eyes as she turned to our PE teacher. "Miss, someone's taken my journal. It's very important to me." An investigation ensued, but no one came forward, and Thomas feigned ignorance with practiced ease. "Why would I want some religious diary?" he scoffed when questioned. Without proof, the teachers could do nothing but promise to keep looking and encourage the borrower to return the journal anonymously. Throughout the remainder of the day, Sophia's earlier serenity was replaced by a quiet sadness that even I, merely an observer, found difficult to witness. She checked her locker between every class, glanced hopefully at the lost and found box in the school office, and scanned the floors of corridors as though the journal might have been dropped rather than deliberately taken. As final bell rang, I watched her slowly pack her bag, minus her precious journal. The sky outside had darkened further, promising another downpour. Sophia stood at the classroom door, gazing out at the gathering storm with resignation. She had no umbrella. I later learned it had been in her locker and was now missing along with the journal. "You'll be soaked," I said, approaching her with my own umbrella in hand. It was the first time I'd spoken to her directly. "Where do you live?" "Oakwood Terrace," she replied, naming a neighborhood about a mile from the school. "That's on my way. We can share." I offered the umbrella with an awkward smile. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by genuine gratitude. "Thank you. That's very kind." As we walked through the rain-slicked streets, sheltered beneath my aging umbrella, an unusual silence settled between us. Not the uncomfortable quiet of strangers forced into proximity, but something more contemplative. Finally, I found the courage to speak. "I'm sorry about your journal. Thomas is, well, he's always been like that." Sophia nodded, her eyes fixed on the wet pavement before us. "It's not just a journal to me. It contains everything, my prayers, my questions, verses that have helped me. It's like a map of my faith journey. Do you think he'll give it back?" She considered this for a moment. "I hope so, but even if he doesn't, I've been praying for him." This statement so confounded me that I nearly stopped walking. "You're praying for Thomas? After what he did?" A small smile touched her lips. "Jesus said to pray for those who mistreat you. And anyway, people usually only mock what they don't understand. Maybe he needs those words more than I do right now." I had no response to this extraordinary perspective. We continued in silence until we reached her house, a modest, semi-detached with carefully tended flower boxes in the windows. "Thank you for the umbrella," she said as she turned to go, "and for talking to me. Maybe they'll find your journal tomorrow," I offered lamely. "Maybe," she agreed, though without much conviction. "See you tomorrow." I watched her disappear into the house before continuing my own journey home, troubled by thoughts I couldn't quite articulate. There was something about Sophia's response that unsettled me, not because it seemed false or performative, but because it was so genuinely different from how I would have reacted in her place. Later that evening, as I sat at my desk struggling through mathematics homework, I found myself thinking of the verses inscribed in Sophia's journal, words that had given her such equanimity in the face of unkindness. What would it be like, I wondered, to have that kind of anchor in one's life. I had been raised with a vague awareness of religion, Christmas services, and the occasional Easter attendance, but nothing that served as a daily compass for navigating life's complications. "The word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path," my grandmother used to say, quoting one of the few Bible verses I knew. I had always pictured an old-fashioned oil lamp, the kind that casts just enough light to see the next step or two, but not the entire journey. Perhaps that was what Sophia's journal represented to her, not a complete road map, but enough illumination to take the next step with confidence. The thought comforted me somehow as I returned to my equations, each variable and coefficient suddenly seeming less insurmountable than before. The following day arrived with unexpected sunshine, the capricious British weather having exhausted its gloom for the moment. Sophia was already in her seat when I entered the classroom, her desk conspicuously bare without her journal. I offered a small smile as I passed, which she returned with warmth that suggested she considered me a friend after our shared umbrella journey. Thomas arrived late, as was his custom, slouching into the room a full 10 minutes after the bell. Mrs. Bennet merely sighed and marked her register, long past wasting energy on enforcing punctuality with him. I studied him surreptitiously, wondering if Sophia's journal was in his possession even now. His school bag looked suspiciously bulky, and there was something in his expression, a kind of restless agitation, that hadn't been there the day before. The morning proceeded without incident until third period, chemistry. We filed into the laboratory, donning safety goggles and lab coats over our uniforms. Mr. Pearson, our chemistry teacher, was known for his dramatic demonstrations and stringent safety protocols. Today's experiment involved measuring the reaction rates of various metals with acid. "Remember," Mr. Pearson intoned as he moved between the lab benches, "safety first. Goggles on at all times. If any acid splashes on your skin, rinse immediately and inform me." We worked in pairs, carefully measuring small pieces of magnesium, zinc, and iron before adding them to test tubes containing dilute hydrochloric acid. Sophia was partnered with Charlotte Williams, a quiet, studious girl who rarely interacted with anyone outside her small circle of friends. Thomas worked with his usual lab partner, Michael Foster, the two of them paying more attention to their whispered conversation than to the experiment before them. The disaster, when it came, happened so quickly that later accounts varied widely. Thomas, reaching across his desk for more zinc, knocked over a beaker of acid. The liquid splashed across the workbench and onto the floor, narrowly missing Michael, but catching Mr. Pearson, who had been approaching to check their progress. The acid splattered against his trouser leg, immediately beginning to eat through the fabric. "Emergency shower!" Mr. Pearson shouted, hurrying toward the safety station in the corner. But in his haste and pain, he slipped on the acid-slicked floor, falling heavily against a shelf of chemical reagents. Glass bottles tottered precariously, several crashing to the floor in a dangerous medley of chemicals and broken glass. Chaos erupted. Students backed away from the spreading puddle of mixed chemicals, some shrieking, others frozen in shock. Mr. Pearson struggled to his feet, limping toward the emergency shower while attempting to keep the contaminated fabric away from his skin. Through the confusion, Sophia moved with surprising decisiveness. She grabbed the laboratory's emergency procedures manual, quickly flipping to the relevant section. "We need sodium bicarbonate for the acid," she called out, already moving toward the supply cabinet, "and the spill containment kit for the rest." While other students remained paralyzed with indecision, Sophia and Charlotte rapidly assembled what was needed. They carefully scattered sodium bicarbonate around the perimeter of the spill, working inward to neutralize the acid. Meanwhile, Mr. Pearson had reached the emergency shower and was dousing his leg, his face contorted with pain. "Someone call the nurse," Sophia directed, her voice calm but authoritative. When no one moved, she looked directly at Thomas, who stood nearest the classroom phone. "Thomas, please call the nurse, now." Perhaps it was the unexpected use of his name, or the quiet authority in her voice, but Thomas moved to the phone without his usual defiance, punching in the extension for the nurse's office. The accident response team arrived minutes later, taking over the cleanup with professional efficiency. Mr. Pearson was escorted to the nurse's office, his injury painful but not severe thanks to the prompt action. The rest of us were dismissed early, ordered to wait in the library until our next class. As we filed out, Mr. Pearson stopped Sophia at the door. "Quick thinking back there, Miss Martinez. Where did you learn emergency response procedures?" Sophia glanced down, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "My father's a paramedic. He always says preparation prevents panic." Mr. Pearson nodded approvingly before allowing her to join the rest of us in our temporary exile. In the library, the usual social boundaries reasserted themselves, students clustering in familiar groups to dissect the excitement. I found myself gravitating towards Sophia, who sat alone at a table near the reference section. "That was impressive," I said, sliding into the chair opposite her. "Most of us just stood there uselessly." She shrugged, embarrassment evident in her expression. "I just remembered what my dad taught me. It wasn't anything special." Before I could respond, Thomas approached our table, his typical swagger noticeably subdued. He stood awkwardly for a moment, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, before finally speaking. "Thanks," he mumbled, addressing Sophia without quite meeting her eyes. "For, not letting Pearson's leg get melted off." "You're welcome," Sophia replied simply. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken eventually by Thomas reaching into his school bag. "Anyway, I found this. Thought it might be yours." He withdrew the leather-bound journal, placing it on the table between them with uncharacteristic care. Sophia's intake of breath was audible. She reached for the journal, her fingers trembling slightly as they reconnected with the familiar leather. "Thank you," she whispered, genuine gratitude coloring her voice, despite the circumstances of the journal's disappearance and return. Thomas shrugged, already retreating behind his usual mask of indifference. "Whatever. Wasn't that interesting anyway?" He turned to go, then paused, but that bit about the lost sheep was, I don't know, different than I expected. With that cryptic comment, he sauntered away to rejoin his friends, leaving Sophia and me staring after him in mutual bewilderment. "He read it," Sophia said softly, opening the journal to check its contents. "He actually read it." I leaned forward, curious despite myself. "What's this about a lost sheep?" Sophia turned the pages until she found what she was looking for. "It's a parable Jesus told about a shepherd who leaves 99 sheep to find the one that's lost." She pushed the journal slightly toward me, allowing me to see the page. There in her neat handwriting was the story, accompanied by a small, skillfully drawn illustration of a shepherd carrying a sheep on his shoulders. He drew something, I noted, pointing to a margin where an awkward addition had been made to her illustration. A small sheep, separate from the flock, rendered in blue ballpoint pen with considerably less artistic skill. Sophia's eyes widened as she studied the addition. "He identified with the lost sheep," she murmured almost to herself. "Oh my goodness." The journal's return might have been the end of the story. A small redemptive moment in the otherwise unchanged social hierarchy of our school. But life, I've found, rarely follows such tidy narrative arcs. The next morning, Sophia arrived to find a small package on her desk, clumsily wrapped in what appeared to be pages torn from a notebook. She opened it cautiously, revealing a brand new umbrella, compact, purple, with a sturdy automatic mechanism. "Who's sending you presents?" Charlotte asked, peering over Sophia's shoulder. Sophia shook her head, bewildered, until she noticed the scrap of paper tucked into the umbrella's handle. I couldn't see what was written there, but her expression softened into a smile as she read it. She tucked both note and umbrella into her bag just as Thomas entered the classroom, deliberately avoiding looking in her direction as he took his seat. The The mystery deepened at lunch, when Sophia unwrapped her sandwich to find another note tucked between the wax paper sheets. This time, I was close enough to read the hastily scrawled message. "Is it true what you wrote about everyone mattering to God, even people who do bad things?" Sophia read the note twice, then carefully wrote a response in her journal, tore out the page, and folded it neatly. When Thomas passed our table on his way to dispose of his lunch tray, she slipped the paper into his blazer pocket with a deftness that suggested she'd considered how to accomplish this exchange without drawing attention. Throughout the afternoon, I observed a strange, silent communication developing between Sophia and Thomas. Notes appeared and disappeared, always discreetly, never acknowledged verbally. Once I glimpsed Thomas reading a page torn from Sophia's journal, his brow furrowed in concentration, lips moving slightly as though sounding out unfamiliar concepts. The situation came to a head the following day, a Thursday made remarkable by the unexpected appearance of our headmaster, Dr. Williams, in our classroom just before lunch. He was a tall, austere man who rarely interacted with students outside of formal assemblies or disciplinary matters. "Mrs. Bennett, might I borrow Thomas Blackwell for a moment?" His tone made it clear this was not a request, but a command. Thomas stood slowly, his face a carefully constructed mask of indifference that didn't quite conceal the apprehension beneath. He followed Dr. Williams into the corridor, the door closing behind them with ominous finality. Whispers erupted immediately. "What's he done now? Bet he's finally getting expelled. Dad says his father's on the board of governors. They'll never kick him out." Sophia alone remained silent, her gaze fixed on her journal, which lay open before her. Her lips moved in what I now recognized as silent prayer, her right hand absently tracing the cross embossed on the journal's leather cover. Thomas returned 15 minutes later, his expression unreadable as he resumed his seat without comment. Mrs. Bennett, who had clearly been informed of the situation, cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Class, I've just been notified that there will be a special assembly tomorrow morning. Attendance is mandatory for all students." This announcement was met with the usual groans. Assemblies invariably meant missing free periods or extended classes to compensate. As we packed up for lunch, Sophia approached Thomas's desk, her journal clutched to her chest. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. Thomas glanced up, surprise momentarily replacing his studied nonchalance. "Yeah, fine. Just the usual lecture about applying myself and living up to the family name." He attempted a dismissive eye roll, but the effect was undermined by the tension evident in his shoulders. "If you want to talk about it." Sophia left the offer hanging, unfinished but sincere. Thomas stared at her for a long moment before responding. "Why do you care? After what I did with your book and everything?" Sophia considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because everyone deserves a second chance. And because sometimes the people who act the toughest are fighting the hardest battles." The vulnerability that flashed across Thomas's face was so brief, I almost missed it. "Yeah, well, thanks, I guess." He grabbed his bag and left quickly, brushing past her with deliberate casualness. The next morning's assembly was unlike any I'd experienced in my 3 years at St. Catherine's. We filed into the auditorium, arranging ourselves in the usual year groups on uncomfortable plastic chairs. The teachers lined the walls, their expressions varying from bored resignation to curious anticipation. Dr. Williams approached the podium with his customary dignity, adjusting his glasses before addressing the assembled school. "Students, staff, I've called this special assembly to address a serious matter that has come to my attention. Yesterday afternoon, I received a visit from a parent who raised concerns about bullying at our school." A ripple of unease passed through the student body. Bullying existed, of course, as it does in all schools, but it was rarely acknowledged so openly by the administration. "This parent showed me evidence, photographs taken on a student's phone, of multiple incidents involving theft, property damage, and intimidation." Dr. Williams paused, his stern gaze sweeping across the rows of suddenly still students. What disturbed me most was not the incidents themselves, regrettable as they are, but the number of bystanders visible in these images. Dozens of you, watching, sometimes laughing, always silent. The discomfort in the room was palpable now. I found myself staring at my shoes, acutely aware of my own complicity in the ecosystem of casual cruelty that defined our school culture. I could name names, Dr. Williams continued. I could issue detentions, suspensions, even expulsions. But I suspect that would address symptoms rather than causes. He removed his glasses, polishing them slowly with his handkerchief. Instead, I've decided on a different approach. Okay, he gestured to someone off stage, and to everyone's surprise, Thomas Blackwell walked to the podium. He was dressed in his full uniform for once, tie properly knotted, blazer buttoned. In his hands was a familiar leather-bound journal. Mr. Blackwell has requested the opportunity to address you all. I expect you to listen with the same respect you would show me or any member of staff. Thomas stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable with 300 pairs of eyes fixed upon him. He cleared his throat, glanced down at the journal, then squared his shoulders with newfound resolve. So, most of you know me, and most of you probably think I'm a bit of a, well, not a very nice person. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. And you'd be right. I've done some pretty awful things. I've taken stuff that wasn't mine, made fun of people, bullied kids who didn't deserve it. The auditorium was utterly silent now, every student frozen in disbelief at this unexpected confession. Last week I stole something from a new student, a journal. I thought it would be funny, you know, religious girl, probably writing about angels and Sunday school. Thomas opened the journal carefully, as though handling something precious. But when I read it, it wasn't what I expected. It was about feeling alone sometimes, about having questions that don't have easy answers, about trying to be good in a world that often isn't. He turned a page, finger marking his place. There was this one part that really got to me. She wrote about a verse that says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And then she wrote, "Sometimes I feel like the darkness is everywhere, at school, in the news, online. But then I remember that even a tiny light, like a single candle, can push back darkness in a whole room." Thomas looked up, his gaze finding Sophia in the crowd. "I've been the darkness in this school for a long time, making people afraid, making them feel small so I could feel big. But it hasn't made me happy. It's just made me more alone." He closed the journal gently. "So I'm standing here to say I'm sorry to everyone I've hurt, and to say I'm trying to change. I don't expect anyone to believe me right away, I wouldn't, but I'm going to try to be, if not a light, then at least less of a shadow." The silence that followed was profound, not the enforced quiet of discipline, but the genuine stillness of collective processing. Then, from the back of the auditorium, a single person began to clap. Others joined, the applause spreading until the entire school was acknowledging Thomas's courage in a thunderous ovation. As we filed out of the assembly, subdued conversations, replacing the usual boisterous rush to freedom, I found myself walking beside Sophia. "Did you know he was going to do that?" I asked, still trying to reconcile the Thomas I'd known with the boy who had just laid himself bare before the entire school. Sophia shook her head, her expression a mixture of amazement and something like pride. "No. He asked if he could borrow my journal yesterday, but I had no idea this was why." Will it last, do you think? This transformation?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "Change isn't usually a single moment, is it? It's a journey, with steps forward and backward." She hugged her journal to her chest, a now familiar gesture. "But I'm going to pray that he finds the strength to keep going forward." In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere at St. Catherine's shifted subtly but unmistakably. Thomas was neither instantly reformed nor reverted to his former self. Rather, he existed in an in-between state, quieter, more thoughtful, occasionally slipping into old habits, but quickly catching himself. He began sitting with Sophia at lunch, their unlikely friendship drawing curious glances, but gradually less attention as it became the new normal. More surprisingly, others joined them. First Charlotte, then Michael, then a handful of students from different year groups, drawn by the novel experience of a table where conformity wasn't demanded and questions were welcomed rather than mocked. I found myself among them, initially out of curiosity, then increasingly from genuine interest in the conversations that unfolded. These lunchtime gatherings evolved into something more formal when Sophia proposed a weekly discussion group. Not just about religion, she clarified hastily, about anything that matters: ethics, philosophy, current events, personal struggles. To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Bennet offered her classroom as a meeting space, and Dr. Williams gave his official approval. The first session drew 12 students, a modest number, but significant in a school where academic clubs typically attracted only the most dedicated scholars. Thomas arrived late to that first meeting, hovering uncertainly in the doorway, until Sophia waved him to an empty chair beside her. When she opened the discussion by asking what questions people had been wrestling with lately, it was Thomas who spoke first. "How do you forgive yourself?" he asked, the blunt question hanging in the air like a challenge. Not how do others forgive you. How do you stop hating yourself for the person you've been? The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable but contemplative, each person present recognizing the universal nature of the question beneath its specific application. Sophia opened her journal, now considerably more worn than when she'd first arrived. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "There's a verse that helps me. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone. The new is here. It reminds me that we don't have to be defined by our past actions." "But that's for religious people," Thomas objected. "What about the rest of us?" "I think the principle applies regardless of belief," Charlotte ventured, surprising everyone with her contribution. "It's about accepting that people can change, including ourselves. That who we are today doesn't have to be limited by who we were yesterday." The discussion flowed from there, touching on redemption, identity, the possibility of genuine change. No consensus was reached, no easy answers discovered, but the simple act of engaging with the questions together seemed valuable in itself. As the meeting concluded, Thomas lingered behind, helping Sophia gather her belongings. I overheard a fragment of their conversation as I collected my own bag. "Would you mind if I came to church with you sometime?" Thomas asked, the question casual, but the intent behind it anything but. "Just to see what it's like. No promises." Sophia's smile was radiant. "I'd like that. This Sunday?" "Yeah, okay. Sunday." Thomas nodded, a mixture of apprehension and anticipation in his expression. I slipped out quietly, leaving them to finalize their plans, a strange feeling of witnessing something profound settling over me. The discussion group continued throughout the term, growing gradually in numbers and depth. We tackled questions of meaning, purpose, ethics, and faith, sometimes finding common ground, other times respectfully acknowledging our differences. Sophia's journal became a communal resource, passed around the circle when someone wanted to reference a particular passage or reflection. Thomas attended church with Sophia that Sunday and several Sundays after. He never spoke about these visits in detail, but a subtle change manifested in him, a gentleness that tempered his natural intensity, a thoughtfulness that replaced his former impulsivity. He began carrying his own journal, a simple composition book, rather than Sophia's leather-bound volume, but filled with increasingly detailed reflections. By Christmas, our little group had swelled to 20 regular attendees from across year groups. When we gathered for an end-of-term celebration, Sophia suggested we each share something we were grateful for from the past months. The responses varied widely: academic achievements, new friendships, personal insights. When Thomas's turn came, he hesitated, uncharacteristically self-conscious. "I'm grateful for second chances," he said finally, "and for people who see something in you that you can't see in yourself yet." His gaze met Sophia's briefly, before he quickly added, "Also for not failing chemistry after the acid incident." The laughter that followed was warm, inclusive, free from the cruel edge that had once characterized humor in our school. Later, as we helped clean up the classroom, I found myself alone with Sophia for a moment. "Did you ever imagine this would happen when you first came here?" I asked, gesturing to the remnants of our celebration. The empty cups, the circle of chairs, the atmosphere of genuine fellowship. Sophia considered the question thoughtfully. "Not specifically, no, but I hoped I'd find friends, people I could be real with." She smiled, tucking her ever-present journal into her bag. "I just didn't expect it to start with someone stealing my most precious possession." "Funny how things work out," I mused. "Providence," Sophia replied simply, or as my grandmother would say, "God writes straight with crooked lines." Looking back now, from the vantage point of 5 years and the wisdom of early adulthood, I marvel at how a single stolen notebook became the unlikely cornerstone of lasting change. Thomas is studying paramedic science now, inspired by Sophia's father. Sophia herself is pursuing religious studies with a focus on interfaith dialogue. The discussion group continues at St. Catherine's, shepherded by new generations of students, but still guided by the principles established in those early meetings. As for me, I've learned that light indeed shines brightest against darkness, and that sometimes transformation begins with the simplest act of seeing someone, truly seeing them, beyond the roles we assign them in our social narratives. It turns out that the most valuable things can't be stolen, only shared, and in the sharing multiplied beyond measure.